Hi, this is APUS History, Unit 1 Review. This is flipped lesson number 1. As you are listening to the lecture and following along, please take a few notes and make sure that you're writing down the things that maybe you have questions on and maybe you need to review a little bit more. The lesson objective today is today we will review the founding of the American colonies from 1492 to 1750. So we're going to cover all of the basics in terms of exploration and settlement, and then we'll talk a little bit more at the end about the different colonies, how they're established and why they're established, and I'll try to highlight the most important things that you'll see on the quiz tomorrow. The big picture of this time period is between 1607 and 1763, North American colonists developed experience in and the expectation of self-government in political, religious, economic, and social aspects of their lives, leading to major changes in terms of government and major changes in terms of our relationship with the founders of the colonies, which would be England, Spain, and France. All right, let's get started first with exploration and settlement by France, Holland, and Spain. You're really going to want to focus in on Spain and France. Holland, as we know, they established New York, but later that's transferred to other powers. So France and Spain, and then obviously England, all of those will be on the quiz tomorrow, and they are always highlighted on the AP test. All right, some of the factors that are leading up to exploration. There are some dynamics that are causing Europe and major European powers to expand. It starts with the Crusades and moving towards the east to Christianize and drive out those who are not Christian. So what the Crusades are doing is they're moving towards the east, they're bringing back some of these exotic goods and spices and fabrics and gold, and so this creates a desire for these exotic goods. There's also a desire to break the Italian monopoly on trade within Europe and then within the world. So the Italians at this time have a trade monopoly, specifically in the spice trade. And so many other European powers, like Spain, who is wanting to expand economically, and they're desiring to break that Italian monopoly. The third major factor that's leading to European exploration is the fall of Constantinople, so the fall of the Roman Empire in 1453. That makes trade much more expensive. The Muslim Turks who took over in Constantinople only permitted cargoes from the east to pass through their city and on their terms. And so what they're going to look for, Spain specifically, is going to look for an alternate route, not going through Constantinople anymore because it's making it much more difficult and more expensive to pass through that city. The Renaissance is highlighting the potential of the individual, which is leading to the creation of new technologies and also the sheer potential of the individual to reach new areas and new places. So with the Enlightenment, or the Renaissance, with the Renaissance, there's new navigation equipment, new ships with improved rudders so that we could sail into the wind, and so this is bringing us to have the capabilities of going further and faster in terms of the sea. The monarchs at this time, especially the monarchs in Spain and France, are going to desire the accumulation of more wealth, more prestige, and more territories. There also is a desire to expand the Roman Catholic Church and to Christianize natives in these other areas. And then the last thing, and you're going to see this highlighted in both Spain, France, and then also in England, and it seems that on the AP test they really focus on mercantilism in England, but also Spain and France are right there with them. And what is mercantilism? You guys learned this in class. Mercantilism is essentially economic nationalism, so it ties in colonies, and the purpose of these colonies is to bring money and accumulation of wealth to these mother countries. All right, now let's talk about Spain. Now, Spain is one of the first that is going to colonize in the New World. We know that they're not the first European powers or first European people to reach the New World. We know that the Norse seafaremen made it their first to Newfoundland, but they're the first who are going to make claims in the New World. And some of the important people that you need to know are Columbus. Obviously, we talked about him in class. Magellan, Cortez, Coronado, who are going to play a more significant role in the Southwest and in Central America. The first land holdings that are established are in Cuba and other Caribbean islands like Haiti. And then moving westward, Mexico, California, the American Southwest, and Florida. And we'll talk about Florida a lot more in depth later on once the United States is established. What are they seeking? They're seeking, first, obviously, we talked about this in class too, they're seeking a way in which they can get to the east. And Columbus, he knew that the world was round, and so he wanted to find a quicker way to go east because of all those reasons that I mentioned in the last slide. And then he's also trying to accumulate wealth for himself and then also for the crown. In terms of settlement, there are some patterns with the Spanish. Immigration to the colonies is very tightly controlled, very different from, say, or a country like England, where immigration isn't as tightly controlled. So immigration to the colonies is very much controlled. The people who are going to be in control of the colonies are Spanish-born governors who are going to be put in place by the crown themselves, by the king and the queen. The Creoles, who are those who were born in the New World, even though they are middle upper class merchants and landowners, the Creoles have very limited political power. Most of the political power, as I said, goes to the Spanish-born governors. Indian labor is initially utilized throughout the Spanish Empire in the New World. So not only in Cuba and the Caribbean and Haiti, but also in Central America and also the American Southwest. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but in the American Southwest, they'll set up the encomienda system, which is a way in which Spanish-born governors and Spanish-born individuals have control over Indian labor and will force them to do certain things. They kind of have more of a paternalistic view, at least in theory, of Indian labor, and then they force them into submission, and that will later lead to the Pueblo or Pope's Revolt in 1680 in New Mexico. Spain is again going to enforce the mercantilist policies. Remember, that's economic nationalism. With Columbus and with movement to the New World, we see a more global economy. And with that global economy, we see the Columbian Exchange. And you remember this from class. The Columbian Exchange is the intercontinental exchange of goods, people, animals, food, and obviously most significantly the diseases that are exchanged between the New World and the Old World, leading to the extermination of many native people. So some are dying just of disease, others are dying because of the conquistadors that are going to move across Central America. The Roman Catholic Church at the time is also going to want to Christianize. And so they're going to establish missions, and you remember that, I think it's probably from 4th grade that you studied missions. So there are missions set up all along the West Coast. As I mentioned before, the encomienda system was a way in which they could regulate Native American labor, and so the natives were under the power of one or two Spanish individuals, and they were supposed to somewhat protect these individuals and try to prevent, at least theoretically, prevent wars from breaking out between native tribes. But ultimately this results in revolts because native people don't want to be under the control of the Spanish, and as I mentioned before, like the Pueblo Revolt in 1680. All right, moving on to France. Cartier and Champlain and La Salle established claims in the New World, specifically in Canada and the Mississippi River. One thing you need to make sure you make note of is the claims are going to overlap those in England and Spain. They also seek to Christianize or Catholicize natives. The settlement patterns for France is first immigration. Immigration is very tightly controlled with the exception of Huguenots and other religious dissidents, and they are going to establish settlements in New York and Pennsylvania. The French, for the most part, are going to coexist with the natives, predominantly because of economic reasons or for economic reasons. So they're going to trade money and goods for fur, specifically beaver fur. And one of the most important places in which they'll do this is in the Ohio River Valley, and that will cause huge controversies later on, and we'll get to that in a few weeks. They too are going to be mercantilist in nature. So Spain, England and France are all in favor of mercantilism. Remember, this is that economic nationalism. Let's talk about the factors that are encouraging English settlement. First, John Cabot and Henry Hudson are going to give England its claims in Northern America. We know those names. Probably you recognize Hudson from like the Hudson River and Hudson Bay and Hudson University, all in New York and in the New England area, and then also in the Great Lakes. So they're going to claim Northern America. And the English are going to set fewer restrictions on immigration. And in comparison, or if you can contrast that to the Spanish had much more restrictions on immigration. So the English are going to be a little bit, have a more leniency in terms of immigration. Some of the reasons why people are immigrating. First, let's talk about the conditions in England at the time. First, the English Civil War from 1642 to 1651. As you learned last year, we had the Royalists versus the Parliamentarians, the desire for more democracy, if you will, and a break away from the monarchy during this time. So we see the execution of Charles I, and Oliver Cromwell takes over during this time. Also, there is religious controversy in England. In 1521 is the emergence of the circulation of Martin Luther, or Lutheran doctrine, which is questioning the authority of the church. And also Henry VIII and the creation of the Anglican Church is also causing religious unrest. Next, the Glorious Revolution. This is obviously after the Civil War. And we see the emergence of a constitutional monarchy within England, and they establish Parliament and then also a figurehead with William and Mary as the monarchy at the time. Also, foreign war, specifically with Spain. In 1588, the English fleet defeats the Spanish Armada, and then also, as always, they are at war with France as well. So some of the reasons for immigration, first, obviously, is economic opportunities. So just like today, people are seeking new economic opportunities. With the enclosure movement, as we talked about in class, there is a desire for more economic opportunity, and there's high unemployment. Many are seeking to escape political persecution, especially during those times when there's political unrest within England. Also, desire for religious freedom, with the teachings of Martin Luther, with the teachings of John Calvin. They're looking to find new areas in which they can practice their faith without persecution. And then, obviously, as we talked about before, is mercantilism. And this is the big thing that is emphasized on the AP test, is this economic nationalism within England. But it's kind of contrasted because they are in this period, what we call the period of salutary neglect, which is, although they want to enforce mercantilist laws, they are not heavily enforcing it. And so this creates this idea of self-government and in the future United States, which will later lead to pro-America and pro-Revolutionary War sentiment. In 1651, under Oliver Cromwell, we see the Navigation Ordinance. And this is essentially establishing an English trade monopoly with the colonies. So if you want to send, or if merchants want to send English goods that were created in other colonies, it has to be specifically with English vessels. And then later on in 1660, under Charles II, the Navigation Acts come into fruition. And that's where products that are made in English colonies, like tobacco, have to be shipped to England or her colonies. So this is creating a monopoly. But one thing you need to make sure that you make note of is the Navigation Acts are not enforced. So even though they have them, they are not enforced, which is also creating this idea of salutary neglect. And secondly, in terms of mercantilism, is the creation of the Dominion of New England. In the Dominion of New England, the New England states are economically and politically united under Edmund Andros, who is a governor that is put in place by the king. And with the Dominion of New England, the king wants to directly regulate trade. So with all of these different states, like Massachusetts, Maine, all of these New England states, he wants to directly regulate trade. So if you take a look at the British land holdings, the Spanish land holdings, the French land holdings, you can see that some of the areas are very close and some of them even overlap. Now, the patterns of English settlement, we'll try to make this quick so that we can finish up this lecture. First, let's talk about New England. And New England is established, well, at least the Plymouth colony is established in 1620. And it's established by separatists. Remember, separatists, those who want to separate from the Anglican Church. And with the Plymouth colony, and before they disembarked from the Mayflower, you remember the Mayflower, they signed the Mayflower Compact, which is establishing majority rule within the new colony. In 1630, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is founded predominantly by Puritans. And one important person that you need to make sure that you remember about the Massachusetts Bay Colony, his name is John Winthrop. And John Winthrop has a very famous speech that we read in class called The City on a Hill. Remember, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is supposed to be an example, a shining example of Christianity and Christian charity to the world. Also in New England are the religious dissidents, and they established certain colonies like Roger Williams, who establishes Rhode Island. Remember, it's called the Sewer because it was very accepting of many religious beliefs. Next is Anne Hutchinson, and we talked about her in class as well. Antinomianism is what she believed in, which is essentially considered heresy. She's kicked out of the colony, and she is forced to walk to New York. Remember, her family is killed by natives. The Chesapeake, founded in 1607 with the founding of Jamestown. Remember, Jamestown had some difficulties initially. They're founded by a joint stock company, a royal charter from the king, and they established the Virginia Company. They're saved by tobacco. Remember, they're saved by tobacco. And we talked about John Smith, who is going to be essentially like a military leader at the time, and he's going to take control of Jamestown. And then later on, tobacco, brought over by John Rolfe, is going to save the colony. And they are Anglican, so very different from New England, who is Puritan. They are Anglican. Next, Maryland is founded in 1632. It's a proprietary colony given by the Crown to Lord Baltimore. It becomes a haven for Catholics. The Middle Colony is started in 1664, and many of those are purchased from other nations. So New York, New Jersey, Delaware, those are all considered to be middle colonies. So they're originally purchased from the Dutch. And then Pennsylvania is granted to William Penn. And remember, that's a Quaker colony. And the middle colonies are going to have a very different demographic and also very different economic system than some of the other colonies. They're mostly agricultural in nature. They have small farms. They produce crops for home consumption and export. And they're pretty modest in terms of their production of crops, unlike the Chesapeake, which is going to be just an economic powerhouse. The Restoration colonies in 1665 are established under the Restoration Crown, so the restoration of Charles II, and those are the Carolinas. And the Carolinas are also going to be more geared towards cash crops, and they're going to be Anglican. And we'll talk more about the differences between these different colonies later on. And then lastly, Georgia. Georgia is the later colony that's founded in 1732. It's founded as a debtors colony, and the person who is in charge of that, his name is James Oglethorpe. And it's also important because it's a buffer zone between Spanish Florida and then the English colonies. The political developments in the colonies. There are three types of colonies. And the first type of colony is a royal colony. And some of the royal colonies are Virginia, New York, and later on Georgia. So they are right under the control of the crown. The second type of colony is a governance set up by a charter. And some of those include Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So they're royal charters, and then they set up governors that are there, that are established by the king. And then last are the proprietary colonies. So Maryland, Pennsylvania, Carolinas, and New Jersey are all proprietary colonies. The political structure of these. First, we have a governor. And the governor in many of these colonies is appointed by the king or by the proprietor. So like in Maryland, it would be established by Lord Baltimore. And places like that have a governor are the Chesapeake, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas. And also, sometimes governors are elected by property-holding men, like in New England. In some places, there is a two-house legislature elected by property-holding men. Do you see a pattern here? All right, now the local government in New England, it's set up in a town hall setting, so a town hall meeting. In the Chesapeake, they appoint justices for local organizations and to run local affairs. And then also in the middle colonies, there is elected county officials that are elected by property holding men. Suffrage in the colonies are granted to men with, guess what? Property, yes. But what is happening in these areas, and especially in New England, is there is this evolving desire for home rule. So even though they came from England or other places, there is a strong home rule sentiment that is developing. And we'll see some major problems that occur politically because of a lack of political power and a lack of equality amongst individuals, especially those indentured servants that we'll talk about later on. And it's exemplified in Bacon's Rebellion. All right, thanks for watching. That's it, guys. After this lesson, make sure you briefly summarize everything, so maybe 3 or 4 sentences about what you learned. And then I'd like you to make a list of 3 parts of this lecture that you need to review. Maybe you need to look at the colonies and the differences between them, or maybe you need to look at Bacon's Rebellion before the quiz tomorrow. So look at your reading notes, look at AMSCO, look at your lecture notes, review the timelines at the end of chapters 1 through 3, and you should be ready to go for the quiz tomorrow. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Bye.